How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to the first in what may become a series of videos. Obviously, everyone knows I'm a big NASCAR fan, but one thing many of you probably don't know is that I also recently graduated college. And in college, I was a film major. That's part of why I started out of the Grooving College, to keep my filming and editing skills somewhat sharp in my downtime. But as a result, I do have a strong interest in not just film, but also TV and broadcasting. And so one thing I always look for every week when I'm watching not just NASCAR races, but any sporting event, honestly, I pay attention to the broadcast. I pay attention to how the game or the race is being presented, the graphics they use, the shots they pick, the stats they throw up on screen, but perhaps most importantly, I pay attention to the announcers, commentators, the play-by-play. In my opinion, those are the guys who can make or break the greatest sports moments. I think about that a lot when it comes to NASCAR as well. NASCAR is also fairly unique in that two major networks basically split the season. The first half of the year is broadcast on the Fox family of networks with all of their own announcers and TV personalities, and then the second half of the year is on NBC, and they have their own group of announcers. So today, I wanted to focus on NASCAR's TV personalities, and I'm gonna do my own version of a tier list. Remember when people were making like tier lists? What was that website? Tier Maker? I'm basically doing my own, but I'm giving it a groovy, out of the groove twist. And today's first episode is dedicated to NASCAR's TV announcers. And I'm limiting it to current, or at least very, very recent broadcasters, but let's dive right in. We've got a good handful to rank here. I'm calling it the Groovy Grid. I know, my naming conventions are not exciting. I just put the word groovy in front of everything. Groovy Gauge, Groovy Grid, does not matter. This is the Groovy Grid. As you can see, it looks like your typical tier list you'll recall seeing from, Tier Maker. But while an A may have been the best grade you could get in school, here on the Groovy Grid, the best grade you can get is a G for Groovy, the Groovy tier. Everyone's vying for a spot in that exclusive club, so that's how we rank things. G for Groovy, all the way down to F for not groovy. Anyway, let's jump right into this. Here are the contestants, or at least most of them. Let's kick things off with my boy, Larry McReynolds, the crew chief at Fox for the last 20 years, roughly. I'm starting with him because he's not really in the booth anymore the way he was for many, many years. He's sort of taken on a slightly smaller role on the Fox broadcast. He's still an analyst for most of their live Cup Series races, but he's no longer traveling every week and all that, but he's still involved. He is still very much involved, dropping his Larry McNuggets everywhere. Larry McReynolds is an easy A tier. I grew up with Larry McReynolds calling races through the first half of the schedule. He just has an iconic voice. A lot of NASCAR networks have tried the combination of, a play-by-play or lap-by-lap commentator, a crew chief, and then a recent driver. McReynolds has obviously filled that crew chief slot. He is an all-time great NASCAR crew chief, super accomplished, and he's brought not only a ton of knowledge to Fox, but a ton of charisma. Who doesn't love Larry McReynolds? He's been a part of some great calls. Of course, he, Darrell Waltrip, and Mike Joy, who we'll talk about in a moment, were teamed up for many, many years. The trifecta. Together, they played off each other really, really well. Larry McReynolds, I think of like the 2003 Darlington finish with Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch. That was, I think, a great, Darrell Waltrip was great here too, but also Larry McReynolds.
Both these cars are driving terrible right now. It's going to be a drag race. Wow! They touch!
I feel like he really took charge at the end of that race. That was a super exciting one. Helped make that one of the all-time great NASCAR finishes. I mean, it was a great finish regardless, but the call did not take away from that. So we're starting off easy here. Larry McReynolds, that's an easy A tier. He's fantastic. It's a shame he's not quite as involved as he once was, but hey, if anyone's earned a relaxing retirement, it is Larry McReynolds. The dude has accomplished a lot. Now, this is kind of difficult because Larry McReynolds is considered a color commentator. He's not the play-by-play or the lap-by-lap guy. Let's talk about a lap-by-lap guy here. Let's talk about Rick Allen from NBC. Well, originally I guess he was with Fox. See, I first heard Rick Allen growing up. He'd call some ARCA races, he called trucks for a long time, but since 2015 he has been NBC's lead Cup Series and often Xfinity Series commentator. I think Rick Allen's a really good dude, but he's really polarizing among NASCAR fans. A lot of NASCAR fans like his voice. He's got that like Joe Buck big game voice, but he often stumbles over his words or accidentally misspeaks and just says something like that's obviously wrong. Like he'll just replace one word with another word that doesn't make sense. Of course, the iconic aggressive goes around line from a few years back.
It's going to be aggressive. Aggressive goes around.
Like, all that's mostly harmless, but when you're expected to lead the broadcast, I mean, that is his job. He's not a former driver or crew chief who's going to add that kind of insight. He's there to pace the show and do all the TV things. And one of the TV things he's supposed to do is get basic facts right and not mix up his words consistently. And unfortunately, he does that more than most others in the business. So that definitely hurts his score a lot of it. And there's a reason a lot of fans do not like him. He has a great voice, and I think he's actually gotten a lot better the last couple of years. I think 2015 to like 2018, there were a lot of issues, but the last couple couple seasons, I actually think he has improved significantly. So I'm certainly not going to fail Rick Allen, but I gotta put him down in the D tier. I think he has plenty of room to move up this list here over the next few years. I know Rick Allen's extremely polarizing. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with that one down in the comments below. Let's stick with NBC. Let's talk about Jeff Burton for a moment. Jeff Burton joined the NBC broadcast once NBC picked back up in the NASCAR schedule in 2015, and he's acted as one of many color commentators. See, NBC's problem in recent years is that the booth is just too busy. They got 4 people in there: Rick Allen, Dale Jr., Jeff Burton, Steve Letarte. There's just too many voices, too many cooks in the kitchen. And so one complaint I often have, and I frequently see other fans having the same complaint, is that the NBC broadcasts just feel too loud. There's never any room to just catch your breath. There's always somebody talking, and it seems like they're always talking louder than the last person. Jeff Burton is sometimes guilty of this. He was a good Cup Series driver, and I think he offers some really solid insight. I mean, that is his job, and I think he does it well. And I have to give him props, especially the last couple years, calling Xfinity races that his son Harrison has been racing in, and Harrison's had some great runs the last couple years. He's also had some tough moments, and credit to Jeff Burton. He doesn't let his emotions get away from him. I mean, it's okay to let that happen a little bit. It's TV, it's supposed to be entertaining, but he does a great job of remaining objective. I thought it was great this year when Burton made that last lap move on Noah Gragson at Texas to get the win. Jeff Burton kept it professional in the booth, but they caught that hidden camera footage of him like fist pumping excited. Like, he's a dad. You gotta let some of that emotion through, but I do give him credit for being as professional as he is on TV. That deserves some commending. He's done really well there. So I don't hate Jeff Burton. He's a C tier for me. I'll be honest, it's really hard to grade Jeff Burton. I don't really know what he is because we just don't hear enough of him consistently. I feel like I'm being kind of tough on some of these guys. Let's talk about one of the greats next. Mike Joy. I think Mike Joy is eligible for the first ever Groovy tier ranking. Classy, clever, and cohesive, Mike Joy is the complete lead announcer package. And for good reason. The guy has been working in motorsports announcing in some capacity since 1970. His commentating abilities have enhanced some of the greatest moments in NASCAR history, the 1998 Daytona 500.
20 years of trying, 20 years of frustration. Dale Earnhardt will come to the caution flag to win the Daytona 500.
20 years of trying, 20 years of frustration is like on the same tier to me personally as, like, you know, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Like, that's the same level because Mike Joy's delivery was perfect. The man knows when to speak. He also knows when to let others around him speak or to let silence, let the picture do all of the talking. He is perfect for TV, and he's extremely versatile. I was really impressed this year with the switch to iRacing for a few weeks in the spring, the Pro Invitational. Everything went virtual, completely new platform. Mike Joy did not skip a beat. This man would have been excused if this was a little over his head. He's been doing things one way for 50 years. Things have completely changed. He would be excused if he didn't seamlessly transition into it. But no, he was perfect. The Fox broadcast this year of the iRacing races were absolutely great, and that was largely because Mike Joy is a true professional. Mike Joy is outstanding. I don't know how much longer he's going to broadcast NASCAR races, but whenever he does eventually call it a career, man, NASCAR Fox, they're losing a great one. But he has been responsible for so many great moments, memorable moments. He's just fantastic, worthy of the Groovy tier in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Let's keep it with Fox. Let's talk about Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon is a difficult one for me to place. As a driver, Jeff Gordon's obviously one of the greats, arguably the most talented NASCAR driver of all time. Yes, you can make that argument. He stepped out of the driver's seat and directly into the Fox TV booth beginning in 2016. I was not a fan of Jeff Gordon at first as a broadcaster. I do not think he meshed well with Darrell Waltrip. I mean, you had two all-time greats that both came from very different eras. You'd think, oh, well, in that case, they can cover the entire picture. They can paint the whole story. It really just felt like they were speaking two different languages or speaking over each other or under each other. Like, Jeff Gordon did not mesh with that initial booth in 2016 and 2017 and 2018. Really, I never thought Gordon and Darrell Waltrip really worked that well together. And then this last year was just Jeff Gordon and Mike Joy, and I feel like the booth lost a significant amount of personality. Jeff Gordon for me is a D tier announcer. I know some of y'all are going to disagree. He's done some things well. He's obviously been great for marketing. You know, he's done some really cool ads like that police chase ad. He's part of a funny new Fox ad with Clint Boyer, who I think is going to be great in the booth. I think he's going to help not only the Fox booth, but also Jeff Gordon specifically quite a bit this year. But I'm sorry, Jeff Gordon just feels really awkward. It does not feel natural. It feels like he's trying too hard sometimes, like with some of these skits. And then other times it feels like he's not sure if he's supposed to be there. He's not sure if he's supposed to speak up at this time. And of course, he's known for the look at this line.
Look at this. Carl Edwards right there.
He just is not smooth. Look at this year's Busch Clash for an example.
Dillon slipped up high.
Is Denny Hamlin going to make a move on him and still try to win this race? Doesn't look like it. He's going to push his teammate to the win. I just think Denny could have pulled out maybe a few feet sooner. Oh, that's right. He's down lap, so he's helping his teammate win this race. Didn't have a shot.
Right before the restart, 2 laps earlier, it was reminded that Denny Hamlin was a lap down. Jeff Gordon must have been checking his notes. He didn't hear it because he forgot and ruined. I mean, it was already a pretty messy race, but he made the finish even messier. He just doesn't sound sure of himself in the booth more often than not, in my opinion, and for me, that does take away from some of the viewing experience. So I have to put Jeff Gordon in D tier. All-time great driver, does offer some really good insight because he is an extremely smart guy and knows racing really well, but his voice, his pacing, he just doesn't sound natural for TV, so I have to put him down at the D tier. Still not an F, he's still not just terrible, but he's one of my, if not my least favorite on-air broadcast personalities NASCAR has right now. Let's talk about NBC's crew chief, Steve Letarte. I don't have much to say about Steve Letarte. This is kind of the same issue with Jeff Burton. There's just too many people in that booth. I feel like either Burton or Letarte have to go. And unfortunately, because they already have Dale Jr., who's sort of the driver, I have a feeling that's going to end up being Jeff Burton, the other driver. But Steve Letarte, the crew chief, offers great insight, occasionally is really funny in the booth, but overall, I don't have a strong opinion on him. I'm going to give him a C. I'll put him in C tier right alongside Jeff Burton. I just feel like a lot of guys in the NBC booth, especially Burton, Letarte, and maybe even Rick Allen, just have not had yet that iconic call that we'll remember for years and years. I mean, I think about one of the most iconic finishes on NBC in recent years was at Chicagoland in 2018, and none of those 3 guys were the reasons that stole the show. That was all Dale Jr., who we'll talk about in a moment. So even in those big moments, these guys don't really feel like they're stepping up in any major way, and I just feel like there's always way too much talking in that booth. There's not enough just patience. So I can't put Letarte any higher than C tier, but if they mix some things around, they've tried some interesting things with the NBC booth in recent years where they'll like move one of the guys out of the booth, put one of them on pit road. Like Letarte's been on pit road sometimes this last year. Like if they keep mixing things up, maybe it'll be better. But overall, it's hard for me to judge. I'm gonna give him a C. I just mentioned it, but let's go ahead and talk about Dale Earnhardt Jr. now. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been in the booth since 2018. He stepped into the NBC booth and immediately brought new life into that booth, brought a new energy that it was kind of lacking the few years before. And credit to Dale Earnhardt Jr. He was a driver first, obviously, for many years, and he's quickly had to make this transition, and he's made this transition in a huge way. NBC milks the heck out of Dale Jr. I've seen him at, the Indy 500. I've seen him at the freaking Kentucky Derby. NBC brings him everywhere, and I like Dale Jr. in the booth for the most part. I do feel like the last couple of years he's been almost desperately trying to recreate the magic of that slide job call that I talked about earlier.
Larson to the bottom of the track.
Slide job.
Trying to take the lead away.
Slide job.
I mean, that was right at the beginning of Dale Jr.'s broadcasting career, and it was a huge, iconic moment. I love that Dale Jr. often lives in the moment. He reacts with excitement. He reacts emotionally. It never really sounds like Dale Jr.'s reading a script. And so I like that a lot about Dale Earnhardt Jr. I think that's really great. We need more of that. But I do feel like some of that energy has waned in recent years. He has not recaptured the same excitement that the slide job race brought everyone. He does have some great one-liners like 2019.
Giant ass scores they can't really see.
So I like him a lot. I'm going to put him in B tier. I think he is an above average commentator, and I hope he gets better because he probably still has many years ahead of him of doing this. He's Dale Earnhardt Jr. He's really charming. I just hope he can bring back some of that energy that he had in 2018 and even parts of 2019. I feel like a lot of that was lacking this last year, and maybe that's just because for many of the races they weren't at the track in person. They were calling them remotely, and that might have taken them out of the moment a little bit. They can be excused for that. But I hope Dale Jr. captures some of that early magic because I could see him jumping up a tier, maybe 2 if he really pushes his luck down the line. All right, we've mainly focused on Cup Series, guys, but I have to talk about this dude. This is one of the most polarizing broadcast announcers in the NASCAR world. Let's talk about Vince Welch. He calls the truck races for FS1. He's on pit road usually for the Cup races, but he's been calling truck races pretty consistently for a few years now, and he's a character. I'll give him that. I think Vince Welch is fantastic as a pit reporter. He's really, really good. As the play-by-play guy for FS1, he's had too many just unfortunate moments.
Racing redemption at his hands. The wheel for Ross Chastain is still and perfect.
It just sounds like he's trying too hard. He has a unique voice naturally. Vince Welch is not one of my favorite commentators. He's got to go down in D tier. I'm sorry. Hey, if this was ranking pit reporters, he'd be up in A tier probably. But when he's leading the broadcast and he's calling all the action, it does not do it for me. I'm sorry. I don't mean to just show the bloopers and act like that's indicative of his entire body of work. No, like he more often than not is fine in the booth, but what do we all remember? We remember the bloopers, unfortunately, and the bloopers for Vince Welch do stand out like a sore thumb. I'm sorry, Vince, I don't take any joy in placing you in D tier. Now, I want to talk about somebody who's recently retired. He last called Cup Series races in 2019, but because he's so recent and because he's so iconic, I want to put him on this list. Let's talk DW, Darrell Waltrip, the man who made Boogity 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 world famous. He's a legendary NASCAR driver, 3-time champion, 84-time winner, but in many ways, honestly, he's an equally legendary TV personality for NASCAR. Darrell Waltrip deserves to be in the A tier. His last couple years were not as strong as especially his first 10, 12, 13 years in the booth. You know, he started calling races in 2001, beginning with that tragic Daytona 500, but Darrell Waltrip was one of the most memorable parts of that finish because it was his brother Michael Waltrip winning, and so contrasting his excitement in the booth for his brother winning the sport's biggest race with the fear and the concern for Dale Earnhardt and that last lap crash, that was, you know, it's eerie to look back at it now, but it is extremely memorable. The trio of Darrell Waltrip, Larry McReynolds, and Mike Joy were fantastic together. Growing up, and even until recently, I would say the Fox broadcasts, or the Fox portion of the NASCAR schedule, have often been my favorite broadcast because it was those three leading the way, and they were fantastic. It was a great era for NASCAR TV broadcasting. Like I mentioned earlier, I think his chemistry with Jeff Gordon, you know, the last couple years of Waltrip's career was not as good as his chemistry with Larry McReynolds, for example, so you know, I feel like Darrell Waltrip sort of became a parody of himself. He was too focused on the charming one-liners that became less and less charming over time, or less and less clever, at least in my opinion. Darrell Waltrip was often controversial as a driver, and he brought some of that edge to the booth, especially in his early years, and I think that's something NASCAR TV often misses in the modern day, so he deserves to be an A tier. Those are the main 9 TV announcers I wanted to look at. I know you guys are going to comment about some other ones. I mean, we can talk about like Michael Waltrip, who calls a lot of truck and Xfinity Series races still. I just don't have a strong opinion on Michael Waltrip. I think some of his like pre-race shenanigans have often been a little too much, but he's pretty good in the booth, so I'll put him in C tier. And a lot of people talk about Adam Alexander, who also calls races for Fox, often calls like Xfinity Series races. I want to put Adam Alexander in here because I actually like Adam Alexander a lot. I'll put him in B tier. The only thing I honestly don't love about Adam Alexander is, it's just unfair of me to say this, I just don't really love his voice sometimes. It's a little too like high-pitched or nasally kind of, and that's not his fault. He can't really control that, but that's probably the only thing I'm not as big a fan of is his voice specifically, but it is unique, it is memorable, and I do think he's a very solid lap-by-lap guy, usually in the Xfinity Series booth. I think he's really good, especially when he's often working with a revolving door of like guest driver broadcasters. You know, that's a tough job when you're not working with the same people every single week, so credit to him. I think Adam Alexander deserves a little bit of respect, but there you go. This is the first ever Groovy Grid. Let me know what you think of my rankings down in the comments below. It's tough to beat Mike Joy. I think he deserves that Groovy tier. But thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new. We talk NASCAR news, rumors, speculation all through the week, and sometimes on the weekends we have fun like we did here today. So if you like NASCAR, you're in the right place. Subscribe now so you don't miss anything once the 2021 season kicks off. I'll see you all in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks for watching.